don't think I ever thought I'm gonna become an artist. I didn't have like a moment. I just loved making things and drawing and painting, and I did it as much as I could growing up. And then through school, I just found as many ways as possible to do that and not anything else. When it came to studying at university, when I realized I could study art, I immediately decided to do that. And yeah, I think every decision I've made has been to try and make things more. I love copying and feeling the satisfaction of recognizing something from the world in something that I've made. And yeah, I love painting. I think I didn't start to paint with oil paint until I was about 19 years old, but that sort of really kept me interested and kept me satisfied with making. I'm very greedy and I get very obsessed with different artists and obsessed with how they do what they do. And especially when you're starting out, those influences feel so strong and they sort of permeate all of your work. When I first started painting, I started as a portrait painter. And so I learned to use oil while looking at bodies and flesh. And so I was looking at Frank Auerbach, I was looking at Lucian Freud, I was looking at Jenny Saville. And the idea of like paint becoming flesh, sort of transcending its material qualities, felt really important. And I think those artists still, I think you can still see them in the work. I think they sort of laid their influence quite strongly. As I carried on painting, I became less interested in a likeness and painting the body as a form, and much more interested in the idea of the body and what it feels like to be in a body and move through the world. And I started looking more at de Kooning, which led me to a more abstract place, and thinking much more about just the material qualities, much less about the figuration behind it. So de Kooning's been a huge influence. And I suppose when I think about the gesture and I think about kind of how to create rhythm and movement in the work, I think of Lee Krasner. Sort of dismantle a practice into lots of different sections, and for each section there's sort of a hero or like a person that I'll get their book out and I'll sort of work out how they do it and think about how I can implement that into my work. Nature is a really important part of my work, and I think of nature as to do with something that's self-propagating, something that's organic, that is about the accidents that happen in paint. My way of painting relies a lot on that sort of accidental nature of the painting process and the idea that the painting grows itself and I'm sort of responding to things that are out of my control that are happening on the canvas. I think of the studio as somewhere that I can bring in lots of different information, bring in images and films, and sort of feed what might then come out of the studio, but it's sort of like tending to this sort of garden that produces paintings, I suppose. I think my preoccupation with flowers is slightly different. I'm certainly interested in this idea of something that's chaotic and natural, but also cultivated, and that mixture, because I think painting is that. Paint is, for me, chaotic and messy, and you're trying to cultivate it, trying to make these sort of rhythms and trying to sort of draw forms out of it. And I think flowers represent sort of the most cultivated part of nature that we've had a huge hand in. I'm also often looking at decorative motifs and repeat patterns and sort of the most contrived and artificial parts of imagery that I can find, where flowers appear an awful lot. So for me, it holds that dual thing of being about nature, but also being very much about this sort of polite, cultivated human thing. I have looked at flowers as a metaphor for the body before, specifically the female body, and thinking about flowers in bloom being likened to like girls hitting puberty, or flowers with petals missing being likened to a girl who's lost her virginity, and sort of that specific time in a woman's life where society is way too interested and excited or worried. So I made a body of work looking at Dutch still life and looking at the idea of the monstrous feminine, the idea of the blooming but decaying woman, I suppose, and the archetypes that you get in horror films of girls hitting puberty and becoming monstrous in some way, like in Carrie or in Teeth. And thinking, sort of looking at the flower, if you zoom so close in on it that it becomes this bodily thing that could look like intestines or something, that, you know, it's such a polite, nice thing that smells beautiful, but it is the sexual organ of plants. And I think there are ways of, I don't know, it was fun thinking about it. Like, what if it was huge? What if you were inside it? What if it was cavernous and oppressive? When I started painting, I was afraid of colour. I felt like it was quite unserious. My paintings were very brown. I sort of lent into colour at one point, and for me there's something freeing, a bit tacky about really colourful paintings that I really enjoy. I think colour has the potential for creating like associations more than anything else in painting. I think it's the strongest tool for making those connections, so it is very important. And I'm often working from other sources, so it's my way of carrying sources in, but then I might heighten the colour to try and make something feel more contemporary, more digital, or I might make it more yellow to make it look like an old painting with sort of a yellow varnish in a gallery. So I think it's important for establishing sort of a time period as well in the work. It's what unifies the painting, because I'm sampling from so many different places. If I decide on the colour palette before, it sort of helps me drop things in and that they become a whole. So I'll use one colour that's sort of to create the cushion of sound, and then I'll use another one that will sort of become the melody in the piece and will sort of guide your eye through. I find colour challenging and exciting because it's sort of exists as a self-contained ecosystem. I was looking at the work of Tiepolo in Venice, and his colours are beautiful. But if you take them individually, they're greys, they're sort of greyish pinks. They're not stunning colours on their own, but there's something about the way they operate together that they just sort of buzz and light each other up. And I think that's the exciting challenge with painting, is to try and get all of the elements internally to sort of speak to each other, because it's its own little world. I suppose I think of abstraction as something which speaks of pure feeling and the feelings that you get from looking at things. I'm not really an abstract painter. I don't really understand abstraction on its own terms. I'm definitely a figurative painter, and I think I'm trying to move the dial towards abstraction, towards something that's more about the material, about the surface, about my body as I'm painting the work, and more about that kind of body language that's involved in painting, as a way to take something from the looked at to the experiential. I don't know that I agree that something can be decoration. I think most of it is dependent on how you, as the viewer, turn up to something and how committed you are to finding meaning in things. I think the idea that something is decorative and dismissed for that is a gendered idea. There's something interesting about how suspicious or fearful we might be of beautiful or decorative things that are eager to please, to impart information to you. I think we feel tricked and seduced by them. And I think there's something very puritanical and kind of interesting about that. I'm very interested in understanding different aesthetics and pulling them apart and categorizing them in some way. I'm interested in value and perceived value, the way that we expect some things to have important meaning and significance and some things don't. And I suppose that idea of hierarchy has led me to look at gender, which is sort of very much part of the way that, sort of shapes the way that we value things. I think painting, unlike books and music, has an all-at-once quality to it. You see it, it hits you. You can then sort of slowly decode it and look at sections of it. But I don't really think of my work as having that kind of political agency. I think I'm just very interested in using painting as a way of understanding things. As a process, you have to strip things down to their very most basic colors or tones, and you can rebuild them and you can work out exactly how these different images and aesthetics operate. For me, the thing that painting can do is that it is sort of infinitely mimetic. So it can copy, it can sample all of these different things. It also has a quality of being sort of an all-at-once experience where something that you've worked on for months, layering in these different references, can be experienced in one go. So I think as a medium, it does, despite being such an old thing, it does actually capture the experience of living in this sort of like insanely image-saturated world.